Hi friends, welcome to a brief introduction to the different research methods. And in this presentation, I am going to review qualitative research, and this is the type of research that we will be doing for our final paper in this class. I will briefly touch on quantitative research methods just to give you an idea of the different approaches that we can take. So to start off with this presentation, we first have to look at what is research. So research is essentially an organized and systematic process to collecting data, analyzing data, and interpreting data to enhance evaluations, observations, predictions, and comprehension of the world. And so we do research every day of our lives. Now, most of the research that we do is not rigorous. It's not, tied to academic inquiry, but essentially we approach every day with questions, with certain challenges, and we have to collect that data, analyze that data, interpret that data, and to really make informed decisions. So chances are we do this a lot at the workplace, right? So you're given a task, you have to research it, you compile your results, and you make an informed decision. That's essentially what research is. Now, academic research obviously takes that process and rigorously implements it in answering deep questions that we have regarding the reality around us. And so academic research is a systematic process that is specific to a discipline or field of inquiry. And so obviously, because this is a communication class, we will be looking at communication related research, or trying to understand the communication element as we explore intercultural communication from a research standpoint. So how do we conduct research? Now, there's different types of research methods that we as scholars use, and really, the type of method that we use is really contingent on the type of questions we're asking, right? So there are two really broad approaches to research, and this is the qualitative and quantitative research approaches. So qualitative, so if you look at that root word in qualitative, quality, you already get an idea of this approach. So qualitative research really focuses on generating meaning and understanding of a particular phenomenon through rich descriptions. So we are really interested in the quality of meaning of a particular experience that a group of individuals are experiencing. So, we aren't really focused on making predictions or, seeing if variables can predict other variables or specific outcomes. We're just looking at people's life experiences and getting a deeper quality understanding of those experiences. So a lot of times people say this is the humanistic part of research, like we are trying to get to know the human side of research. Now, quantitative, quantity, so again, you can see that root word, quantitative research really focuses on making observable predictions, testing hypotheses, and quantifying opinions, attitudes, and behavior. And so really, quantitative research looks at the frequency and magnitude of a particular phenomenon. And so obviously this deals with more statistical analyses, empirical data such as the numerical data, and to see if the numbers can predict the reality around us. Now, in really rigorous studies, we see this mixed method approach. And this is a combination between both the numerical data and participant description. So we do the numerical testing, and we also do in-depth interviews to triangulate the data to get a complete picture of what's going on. And as we will soon find out with exploring the philosophical assumptions and the different paradigms that research can operate from, we can clearly identify the strengths and weaknesses of each of these different approaches to research. So that leads me to the paradigms of inquiry. So what are the driving assumptions behind the different research methods? Now, obviously, this is going to probably sound completely foreign to you, but my hope is that I will explain it in a very simplistic way so that you can understand the reason why we're doing qualitative research for this particular class. So essentially, any philosophical debate can be tied to four areas of inquiry. And so the first one is ontology. And ontology is the philosophical inquiry into the nature of reality. Essentially, it's asking that question of what is reality? Now, that's the broad branch of philosophy that deals with the nature of reality, and that's called ontology. Now, within ontology, there are two major schools of thought, and these consist of realism and nominalism. So realism believes that the nature of reality is external to the individual and exists whether it is recognizable or not. So reality is universal and exists beyond human perception. So essentially, from a realist perspective, reality exists whether you realize it or not. And so, if we look back in history, we can see elements of this school of thought. So take, for example, at one point, everyone thought the world was flat. Now, realism, they would suggest that obviously because everyone believed that the world was flat doesn't make that a valid argument, or that's not correct, because the reality is, that the world is a sphere. And that reality was beyond the comprehension of the individuals at that time. Now, nominalism takes the opposite approach. So individuals operating from this school of thought believe that reality is internal and within the individual. So essentially, reality is merely a social construct that we make in order to make sense of the world around us. So this really stemmed from Luckman and Berger's social construction of reality, and where they made the argument that if a collective group of people believes something, and that is their belief, whether it's real or not, that is reality for that particular group. So that is ontology. We have two, again, major schools of thought, realism and nominalism. Epistemology is the philosophical inquiry related to the nature of knowledge. So, okay, we have, ontology, what is reality, and then epistemology really looks at how do we know what we know? Like, how do we, what is knowledge? And so from this, within this branch of philosophy, again, we have two predominant schools of thought: positivism and interpretivism. So positivism really believes that knowledge derives from systematic research that finds regularities and causal relationships between variables. So one of the last research projects that I completed looked at attachment styles as a predictor to social media addiction. And so I surveyed, I think it was like 165 people with a Likert type survey. I collected numerical data. I assessed, the different attachment styles. There's 4 of them. And then I also measured social media usage. And I was trying to make the prediction that 2 particular attachment styles can predict whether or not people are going to experience more social media addiction. And so, this knowledge, from this perspective, knowledge is really created through measuring, testing, and analyzing empirical data. That's when we know. Everything else could be a figment of our imagination. So on the other side of this debate is the interpretivism. And so interpretivists really believe that knowledge is relative to the standpoint of an individual, in which the individual assigns meaning to their experiences. And so again, we see that knowledge of the world is merely what individuals believe is truth. And so if you believe it, that's going to be your reality. That's going to be your knowledge of the world. And so again, you can start to see that there's pros and cons to, or not pros and cons, but strengths and limitations for each of these different schools of thought. So while, yes, positivism gets the data, we can do systematic research and empirically state that, yes, this is true, this is not. It doesn't give room for any human interpretation. And so then we have the interpretist. Now, again, if we just believe anything that we want, then there is no standard. There is no way of making any informed numerical predictions or statistical analyses. And so, again, that's a limitation from this point. Just because a group of people think that, it's appropriate to commit genocide, doesn't mean that that is, truth or completely right. So the next area of inquiry is this human nature. So this is really looking at what drives human behavior. Now we have, again, 2 schools of thought. We have the determinism and free will. Determinism believes that human action is caused by or subjected to forces outside of the individual person, and these conditions determine human behavior. So from this perspective, determinism assumes that behavior is predictable and based on external conditions. So, just think about our sympathetic nervous system, and when we're placed in a stressful situation, our body determines for us. We could either fight or we could, run away. So that is kind of like the deterministic perspective to research, that, we can measure the factors and the situations and the conditions that influence people to behave the way they do. Free will, on the other hand, this is the belief that human agency actually governs our action and behavior. So humans are autonomous and have free will despite situational conditions. So, this is the assumption that we are in control of our behavior and we do make informed conditions. Now, again, you can see the limitations and strengths of each of these. So while, yes, determinism is true to a certain extent, that most of our behavior is conditioned, right? Just think of social media platforms. They socially engineer addiction to their platforms, right? This is the attention economy, that model that they're operating from. They get paid when your eyes are fixated upon their product, right? So there's that, an example of determinism. Now, obviously, free will, this does hold true that we can make conscious choices. We do have a conscious choice whether or not to act out on anger or to, try to calm ourselves. Now, most of us are not in that habit of behavior, so it's extremely difficult to do, but you do have the ability to change your behavior. Think of, groups that deal with addiction recoveries, like the 12-step program, right? It's an extremely difficult thing to do, to change behavior or to change our neuroplasticity, the hardwiring of our brains, but it is doable through repeated, prolonged conscious effort. So this is, again, pointing to that free will condition. Now, methodology is how we measure knowledge, or how knowledge is measured. And so again, from this perspective, we have two trains of thought, the nomothetic and the idiographic approach. Nomothetic is really testing hypotheses according to established and rigorous protocols, analyze data based on verified tests, and using results to predict future. So just think of the scientific method. When medical researchers are trying to find a vaccination for COVID-19, right? In order to do that, they have to test hypotheses. They have to have rigorous protocols, in a very sterilized environment to verify the results, to make sure that this thing is going to work. So obviously in medical research and, empirical studies, economics, all of these things in the social science research, this nomothetic approach is extremely valuable because we can test our predictions to see if we are completely right. So, reflecting back on that past study that I did with attachment style as a predictor to social media addiction, I wanted to find out, do certain attachment styles, specifically anxious related attachment styles and avoidant type attachment styles, predict who's likely to be addicted to social media? And the reason why I had that, question, that hypothesis, is because oftentimes people who have a anxious related attachment style really have a low self-concept. And so they're really contingent on other people to validate themselves. And what better way to get validation than to be on social media, and where you can create and curate the image that you want online. And so that was, my thought process leading into it, and so my data did predict that attachment-related anxiety does predict social media addiction. So after, conducting the regression analysis and, the statistical test, my data came out positive. So it was statistically significant. However, the magnitude, the strength of that prediction was pretty low. So it wasn't anything groundbreaking, but to a certain extent, our attachment styles can predict, social media addiction. So I thought that was really interesting. Okay, I'm nerding out right now, so I'm going to move on. The idiographic approach. This is really relying on subjective personal reports from individuals to understand their lived experiences. So essentially, this is interviewing people within a specific context, interviewing a lot of people to get a broad understanding, a deep understanding of their lived experiences. Again, we aren't trying to predict a hypothesis. We aren't trying to, analyze data and make predictions. We are just simply there trying to understand people's shared reality. So obviously, you can see that qualitative research is going to focus more on the nominalism, right? So reality is internal to the individuals. Individuals assign meaning to their world. As researchers, we want to find out what meaning are people assigning to their world. From the epistemological approach, the nature of knowledge. Knowledge is interpretivist. So knowledge is relative to the standpoint of the individual. So we are going to be exploring the reality and knowledge from the standpoint of our participants. You know, when it comes to human nature, we are looking at this free will condition from a qualitative approach. You know, human agency governs actions and behaviors because people do have a certain level of consciousness when they make decisions. We want to find out, you know, what drives people to make that decision, or, you know, what drives their behavior. From a methodological approach, we are going to be using the idiographic assumption. And this is, again, relying on subjective personal reports from individuals to understand their lived experience. Okay, so qualitative research is really fascinating because it explores the human side of, you know, research, whereas quantitative is like data. And so, you know, instead of counting a bunch of people and making predictions based on that, the qualitative approach is really looking at each individual and trying to get their shared experience of a particular phenomenon. So within qualitative research, there are different types of trends in research. We have a narrative research. This really asks participants to share life stories, and we could, you know, gather those life stories and, you know, understand, you know, a relatively large group of people. You know, so narrative research. This was my proposal for my dissertation, looking at people's metaphors, or the metaphors that people use to describe their relationships. So this is looking at, again, that narrative approach. So, you know, I haven't done this study, but what I had in mind when I was interested in exploring the metaphors people use in their relationships was because metaphors, especially conceptual metaphors, really establish a framework within our cognition, in our psyche, that allows us to interpret, you know, the outside world from this structure. So if you think about, you know, a conceptual metaphor, you know, related to relationships, we could say, you know, relationships are like a journey. And so you're using a metaphor, journey, right, to conceptualize, to understand this complex, you know, thing that we're engaged in, a relationship. So you're using one construct to explain the other. So, you know, this is again another really interesting area of research, to explore the narratives and the metaphors that people use to describe their relationships, and really how that influences their interpretation of their relationship and also their behavior. So essentially, this qualitative approach is asking a bunch of participants about their life story and drawing those comparisons. Phenomenological research, yeah, say that a few times as fast as you can. This is essentially when researcher describes the lived experiences of individuals about a phenomenon as described by participants. So this is what we will be doing in this class. You know, we don't want to get too carried away with trying to understand people's whole life experience. Like, we are looking at maybe a specific context of life or a specific situation, such as, you know, conflict. How does conflict emerge from a particular culture within families, specifically between fathers and sons, right? You know, so we're getting very narrow in terms of the phenomena that we're studying. Now, we could take grounded theory approach, and this is essentially where a researcher derives a general abstract theory of a process, action, or interaction grounded on the views of participants. And so, this is really the foundation to how theories develop. And so a lot of times, think of, the theory of gravity. I think it was Newton, right? He was observing all these things, and based on those observations, he developed the theory of, gravity. So grounded theory is the same thing, but applied to, social science type research. So we might observe certain things happening in our environment and think, that's interesting. I'm going to interview a bunch of people to get their experiences with the hope of creating a theory that explains what's going on. And so a lot of the theories that, emerged from, communication research stem from grounded theory approach. And then we have ethnographies, and this is where researcher studies the shared patterns of behaviors, languages, and actions of an intact cultural group in a natural setting over a prolonged period. Essentially, this is, as a researcher, embedding yourself into the cultural experience and observing, interview, doing field work, taking detailed notes, living among the people for a very long time to understand the whole culture of the phenomena. And then, of course, we have case studies. This is where researchers develop an in-depth analysis of a particular case. So one of my former professors at Cal State Fullerton, Dr. Tenzin Dorji, he did a case study with Stella Tingtoomey from Cal State Fullerton, and you notice from previous coursework, Stella Tingtoomey is the author of face negotiation theory. But anyways, they did a case study exploring the moral and ethical implications of honor killing. And so we see that, in different parts of the world, different countries, different cultures, they operate from this. They condone honor killing. So take, for example, if a family member brought dishonor to your family, that would be enough grounds to kill that person. And so there was a case study involved in, I think it was London, where this took place. And so in London, obviously, killing someone is not condoned under any circumstances. But this cultural group was still operating from their culture. And so they killed their family member, and prior to this instance, this person repeatedly reached out to law enforcement asking for help, but it wasn't taken seriously, and as a result, the person ended up being murdered. And so a case study like this explores again the case and picks it apart and analyze the various components to arrive to a more informed conclusion about maybe a particular topic, or how we could approach things like this differently in the future. Okay, so how do we conduct qualitative research? There are so many different steps, and it's so extensive than what I have here, but for the sake of this class and what I'm asking you to do, this should be sufficient. So step one, select a topic worthy of exploration. So think about what would be a good topic to study that relates to communication and culture, right? Now, obviously, those two, topics are very broad. So you want to get very specific, such as, conflict patterns, or, how do people express affection in a particular culture? It could related to identity, how do people communicate a particular identity within a specific context, right? So the more narrow that your topic will be, the easier it is to manage and to research. So again, when selecting a topic, you want to start broad, but really get narrow as you refine that topic. The second step is to read published academic articles on that topic. And by doing so, you're going to inform yourself on all the previous research that has been conducted related to the topic that you're interested in exploring. Step 3, write the literature review. Essentially, this is a brief summary of all the articles that you've read that deal with that topic. And what you're trying to do is provide a review of the literature and saying, look, this is what all of the scholars before me have studied. This is their different approaches. And this is how my study is going to contribute to this body of knowledge. And so to be able to convince me or, other scholars in the field, I have to do a literature review and show them, look, all these people studied this, but guess what? No one studied this. Or, maybe everyone took a quantitative approach and crunched a bunch of numbers, but the numbers don't actually capture the lived experiences. Or maybe the opposite. We have a ton of qualitative research on this topic, but no empirical data. And so that's what my study is going to do, right? And so writing the literature review gives some background to your topic, and you want to think strategically about this and how to set up the literature review in order to help justify your study, right? So it's great that, we're interested in all of these different topics, but at the end of the day, like with anything in life, people are going to be like, so what? What's the why? Why is this important? And so by writing the literature review, that gives us an opportunity to convince the reader that this is important to study. Step 4, develop an overarching research question. So this overarching research question is the research question that you're trying to answer with your study. So think about, how does this, or who, or what, when, where. These are some great ways to develop an overarching question, such as, how do people adapt their communication in a new culture, right? Or, we could look at, what are the motivations for sharing, personal content on social media, right? So this is the overarching question that is guiding the study, or that your study is trying to answer. Step 5, develop interview questions. Now, interview questions are different from the overarching question. Interview questions are designed to help answer that overarching research question. These questions, the interview questions, are the questions you're going to be asking your participant or participants. And so you want to keep them open-ended. So, an open-ended question would be, tell me about your experience with this, or share more on that. How did that make you feel? It leaves the conversation open. Closed-ended questions are saying, did you like this, or did you do this? And oftentimes it's either a yes or a no answer. Those are very closed-ended questions. So develop some research questions designed to help answer that overarching question. Step 6, collect data from participants. Actually interview the people. Now, obviously, there's a ton of steps in each of these steps that we could cover, but essentially what you're going to want to do is find someone who is part of the demographic that you're interested in exploring. So if you're interested in exploring a specific culture and conflict patterns, find someone that is from that culture or is living that reality. So collect data from participants, ask your questions, record that interview, and then you're going to go into step 7. This is analyze data for themes, differences, or contradictions among participants. And so, after recording that interview, you go back and do a thematic analysis. Now, again, there's a ton of steps. Typically, we write out or transcribe the interview so that we have a print up, and we go in and highlight and try drawing connections between the responses. And then step 8, write up the results in a formal paper. So this is quite an extensive project if you do it in its entirety. Again, what I'm asking you to do is something similar to this, but on a very smaller scale, just to get you an idea of qualitative research and, get you exposed to, this type of inquiry. And it's always fascinating when you interview people and learn about their experiences. So before I end today, I wanted to show an example of the whole process of qualitative research. In this module, I have attached some of my previous studies that operated from this methodology. But I wanted to show you with coding data, this is a really time-intensive process. And so this was the data for the paper that I did on sharenting. And so I'll discuss a little bit about sharenting in just a minute. But essentially, I took all of the people's answers and I put them into an Excel sheet. And I started going through and highlighting things that related to my specific research questions that I was trying to answer. And let me see, where did I have it? Okay, here it is. So the code book, right? So for the sharenting project, my first research question asked, what are parents' motives for sharing information about their children through social media? And so I was really interested, why do parents post a bunch of pictures about their young children on social media? We know that social media, even though we think that this is, we have the privacy settings in place, the platforms are still taking our data and selling it for advertisement purposes. And in fact, in my research, by doing that literature review, I found out that majority of, really graphic images on pornographic sites related to like pedophilia were taken from people's social media accounts. And that was really shocking to me that, there's sick individuals out there that are looking at this stuff, but that content was actually gleaned from, people's personal social media account. And so, understanding what are the motives of parents sharing information about their children. Well, through coding all of those things, I boiled those results down to these conditions, and that is significant life events. So 68 participants really highlighted the biggest motivation for them to share pictures of their children on social media was because of some sort of significant life event. Now, this might have been like newborn, like, maybe someone just recently had a child and, they're sharing that experience, or maybe weddings. So a lot of older parents, shared pictures of their children who, were recently married, school award graduations, so a lot of people talked about posting pictures of their young children on social media because of some sort of graduation or birthday or some sort of performance. Side note, this was health updates. I only found a few individuals that said they post personal information on social media about their children, due to health updates. So, oftentimes, maybe asking for support or positive vibes or prayers. This is of one reason or motivation parents had for sharing information. And then social validation. Um, this is interesting. So parents actually post content of their children, not to brag about their children, or not for the child's validation, but for their own validation as parents, And this is interesting as it gets into this social comparison type behavior. So these are, the code book that I had. Now, obviously, this is a really rough draft. This isn't the final result of that study. But let me see if I do have the final study. So draft 2, I don't think this is the final draft, but I'll go ahead and show you this so you get an idea of what your end product will look like. So I'm asking you to do APA. So you're going to have a running head and the title of your paper and also the page number. So if you double click on the header, you can just put this in. Now you want to click on different first page so that the second page you can edit this a little bit different. So you're going to include a title page. So you should have the title of your paper, your name, and then the school that you're affiliated with. So this was entitled Parenting Using Communication Privacy Management Theory to Understand Parental Disclosure on Social Media. And then, of course, this was conducted by me for my doctorate program. The abstract, this is the second page. This is highlighting what you accomplished in the study. So, in this I talked about I had 82 participants complete open-ended survey. Okay, I talked about communication privacy management theory, and then also a little bit about my findings. Now, the third page, this is going to be the introduction to your topic. And so, I have a page, introducing the topic. I think in the final paper is a little bit longer. And then I go into the literature review and research questions. So because I'm using theory to guide my questions and my research, I give a brief summary of that theory. And then, I talk about self-disclosure on social media. What type of studies have other, scholars completed looking at self-disclosure on social media? And then I have, my research questions. What are parents' motives for sharing information about their children through social media? And then the research question 2, what core or catalyst criteria do parents consider before sharing that information on social media? And so again, what are the motivations? And then what type of criteria do parents consider before sharing information? And so, I talk about my methods, how I coded the data, and then my findings. So I structured the findings as it relates to the research questions. So there we have significant life events. 55 people reported significant life events as a strong motive to share pictures and content of their children on social media. Relational maintenance. We saw that 41 people discussed the importance of social media and maintaining relational closeness with family and friends. And so that was a big motivation for them. We also see related to that parental and child validation. So, validating their children by, sharing content about them with family and friends. And then, some people felt like they needed validation as parents. And so they posted, pictures of their children, saying like, oh, look, humbling bragging or humble brag about, my, parental abilities. Health concerns was a sub component of that. What type of core and catalyst criteria do parents consider before disclosing private information of their children on social media? So we see that core criteria, there was boundary maintenance based on privacy settings. So a lot of people, tried controlling the privacy settings on their social media platforms. Content and relational considerations. So a lot of people consider what type of content, is it embarrassing? Is it too revealing? And so, one participant said, I don't take pictures of, my children when they're swimming or when they have, their bathing suits on. A lot of parents, did mention that, taking, those innocent naked baby pictures was appropriate, but only shared them with very select few individuals in close proxemics to their relationship. So these were some of the things that they did. The catalyst criteria, we see risks and benefit considerations. So people would look at sharing this content and what are the risks and benefits. Like, would this be embarrassing for my child? Does that outweigh the benefits that they would receive? And so then they would make appropriate, decisions based on that. So this is a just an example of this. So after the results, I created this discussion, and this is where you essentially interpret the results for the everyday reader. So essentially, you're looking at, okay, what does the results tell us? How do we as scholars make sense of this, and why is this important? And then typically towards the end of any research, there's always this discussion on the limitations and future discussions. So keep in mind that when you do research, there are significant limitations to what we can accomplish. And so in this section, we want to be transparent and say, look, I didn't study this, which is a limitation, or I took this approach, right, which doesn't provide any empirical evidence to suggest that this is what's actually happening, right? This could be just based on people's subjective, interpretations of what they think they're doing, right? And so the limitation section is where you just discuss, some of the limitations to your study, your approach, the results, and then you provide some sort of future direction for other scholars, saying like, look, I looked at this, but future scholarship might look at this other aspect of the situation. Then you end with a conclusion. So that was I think this was the final paper. But essentially, I'm asking you to do something similar, but again on a smaller scale. Yeah, that was the final result. But that is just a brief introduction to research and qualitative research. And again, if you need any help during this process, please let me know. Go ahead and read through that module, watch the videos, do your own research on, how to do qualitative research. There's so many resources out there. There's even YouTube tutorial videos. So I encourage you to take advantage of all the resources available to you to understand what's expected for you in this final project. And again, if there's anything that you need help with, please let me know. I'm always down to do a Zoom session with you. And I think that's it. Have a great day.